adore my 64, my Commodore 64.
It's late in the 15th century and we find ourselves deep in the heart of medieval Paris. A beautiful young street dancer named Esmeralda has been captured and taken to an unnamed castle, and Quasimodo, yes, that Hunchback of Notre Dame, is absolutely having none of it. He sets out to rescue her, prepared for whatever perils stand in his way. Sure, it's not the richest backstory in gaming history, but it does the job, and it sets the stage for one of the most iconic early 64 titles, Hunchback, a game where Quasimodo leaps across ramparts, swings over fiery pits, dodges arrows and fireballs, and most importantly, stays one step ahead of a very determined knight whose armor may as well be solid lead. It's fun, challenging, and a perfect representation of what arcade-style gaming looked like in 1983. So climb that bell tower, grab a rope, and ring those bells as loud as you can as we dive into the story of the most famous Hunchback in gaming history. The story of Hunchback begins on a sunny Florida beach in September 1982. Peter Robinson and David Jones, founders of the English arcade hardware company Century Electronics, needed a hit, and brainstorming on the sand seemed as good a place as any to find one. Century, founded in 1978, had made its name with the convertible video system, a clever arcade cabinet that let operators swap games without replacing the whole machine. To support it, Century started developing their own games, mostly clones of popular hits. Space Fortress was basically Asteroids, Logger was their take on Donkey Kong, and Cosmic Invasion, pure Space Invaders. These games sold, but the real money was in creating something original. So there they were, sketching ideas in the sand, talking about Pitfall on the Atari 2600 and the arcade game Jungle Boy. They liked the rope swinging mechanic, but the jungle theme felt overdone. Then something clicked. Maybe it was the sun, maybe it was the sea breeze, or maybe someone inhaled too much Coppertone. But suddenly they were talking about Robin Hood, and that was the moment everything changed.
That must be him.
Back to England they went and immediately got to work with an artist and 3 programmers. They didn't want Sherwood Forest, too jungle adjacent, so they set the game at the Sheriff of Nottingham's castle. The swinging rope stayed, but everything else became medieval. Battlements to jump, soldiers to evade, arrows to dodge, even trebuchet fireballs. And waiting at the end, Maid Marian herself. The prototype was fun, but something was missing. They wanted more reward, more feedback. So a ringing sound was added each time a screen was cleared. Then, after designing a stage with 4 ropes to cross, the team had a eureka moment. Suddenly, Robin Hood wasn't Robin Hood anymore. He was Quasimodo, Notre Dame's iconic bell ringer. The bells had spoken, and Robin Hood quietly stepped aside, possibly muttering something about union rules. But the timing for such a huge change wasn't ideal, and they only had about a month before presenting the game at an industry show in Germany. Despite marathon coding sessions, they simply couldn't update every graphic. If you've ever thought Hunchback looked oddly medieval English, now you know why. They finished what they could in time for the January '83 event and were eager to show off their new creation. And then, disaster. It was simply too hard. Players died almost instantly and walked away in frustration. Back to England again, with just 11 days before the next event. The team reshaped the early screens to gently ease players into the game. The difficulty curve smoothed out and the transformation was remarkable. Suddenly, Hunchback taught you how to play. It was elegant, effective, and years ahead of the tutorial concepts we take for granted today. The game was finished. Released in the summer of 1983, Hunchback became the breakout hit Century had been chasing. It shot up arcade charts, and the company earned hundreds of pounds per board sold. Money was finally flowing, so much so that Century didn't feel any urgency at all to enter the booming home computer market. But fate, and more importantly bells, rang again. Superior Software had created a Hunchback port for the BBC Micro and negotiated a licensing agreement. With their eyes now open, Century met with Manchester-based Ocean Software, who acquired the rights for £3,000 and produced versions for the Commodore 64, VIC-20 and ZX Spectrum in a remarkably fast 5 weeks. The 64 version was written by John Steele and the port launched in late 1983. Eventually, Hunchback would appear on 9 home computer platforms. Ocean's versions stayed faithful to the arcade original and were hugely successful. They topped charts and became essential additions to 8-bit software libraries. It was Ocean's first officially licensed game, and it laid the foundation for years of hits, including Batman, RoboCop, and Operation Wolf. Their success would continue into the 16-bit era until their eventual 1996 acquisition by Infogrames for £100 million. Century Electronics, unfortunately, did not enjoy the same happy ending. Despite their success with Hunchback, the company was hit by rampant piracy, the 1984 arcade crash, and most critically, a lack of quality games. They released 2 more Quasimodo-themed games, Hero and Hunchback Olympic, both of which were derivative and both of which failed. By 1984, barely a year after Hunchback's success, Century went into liquidation. Hunchback is an arcade-styled action game. It borrows some inspiration from Pitfall, but it's loaded with its own unique twists. Gameplay is simple to learn but difficult to master. Each level is served as a bite-sized chunk, and it's addictive, constantly pushing you to learn the levels and get just a bit further than you did last time. Every game begins with a jaunty rendition of Teddy Bear's Picnic, which, to be honest, feels a bit odd for a game about a deformed man in medieval France. But come on, it sounds great, and Quasimodo just looks so happy as he skips across the rocks. Each level starts with our hero on the left side of the screen, with the bell at the far right beckoning you. Easy, right? Not quite. Arrows can fire from either direction, and rolling fireballs, launched from off-screen trebuchets, add even more challenge. And you'll need to jump battlements, sometimes empty, sometimes occupied by pike-wielding soldiers. Each jump demands pixel-perfect timing or it's instant death. Fortunately, the controls are silky smooth and responsive. Points are awarded after completing a level, and the values are fixed, but there's also the super bonus. Clear a level and earn a bell. Collect 5 bells in a row without dying, and you get a 25,000 point bonus. Die before completing the streak and it resets. It's clever, rewarding survival and encouraging mastery of each screen. The first few screens act as a gentle tutorial, but difficulty ramps up quickly. Soon you'll need to manage multiple hazards simultaneously, timing your jumps with precision. Most obstacles can be overcome with skill and reflexes, but sometimes survival depends purely on memory. Some levels introduce arrows and fireballs that immediately come from the left, killing you instantly if you're unprepared. Some reviewers call this unfair. I call it classic arcade memorization. Either way, it's jump or die. Adding tension, a very determined and very slow soldier patrols each level. He climbs walls and bridges gaps with relentless persistence, like a member of the Masonry Union on overtime. He has to be one of the slowest enemies in gaming history, yet his ominous presence is effective at moving you forward. This guy is in absolutely no rush, but he is going to finish the job. Finally, after completing 15 screens, you reach the final level. The surprisingly gigantic Esmeralda waits in the tower. A few well-timed jumps later, and she's saved. But of course, that's not the end of the game. Hunchback continues endlessly, tossing tougher obstacles at you as you chase the highest score possible. Classic arcade madness. Simple, punishing, and endlessly replayable. Hunchback is an early game, based on an even earlier game, and the audio visuals are definitely of the time. Simple, charming, and utterly recognizable. The graphics are straightforward but full of character. Quasimodo looks dapper in his bright green clothing, the soldiers on the ramparts are suitably menacing, and the obstacles are terrific, especially the fireballs launched from trebuchets. And that slow-moving soldier? Absolutely fantastic. The way he clomps across the screen is both hilarious and terrifying. My only complaint? The bells. I know they're supposed to be bells, but for the life of me, they look more like a weird guy wearing a top hat. Every time I play, that's all I see. I feel like making them yellow would have been better, but what do I know? The sounds are just as charming and perfectly complement the visuals. Quasimodo's bouncy jump, the swish of the ropes, and the little ding at the end of each level all add to the experience. Minimalist as it is, the sound design delivers exactly what it needs to. Sure, the Commodore 64 could have pushed both graphics and sound further, but remember, this was a port. Staying faithful to the arcade original was key. With that in mind, the look and feel of Hunchback is simple, accurate, and entirely appropriate. In other words, perfect. The Commodore 64 Appreciation Society absolutely adores Hunchback, and we're definitely not alone. When it was released, Commodore User gave it 4 out of 5, praising the graphics and noting it was a game all the family will thoroughly enjoy. TV Gamer awarded it 17 out of 25, calling it a very capable port, though not quite as impressive graphically as the arcade original. Even today, it's viewed positively. Fans regularly praise its addictive gameplay and charming presentation. On Lemon 64, it holds a solid 7.18, the kind of score that puts it firmly in the solid, reliable, everyone's favorite uncle of a game category. For what it's worth, this is exactly how I rank it as well. It's fun, challenging, and charming, but it's just outside of my top games lists. As for legacy, Hunchback definitely has an interesting one. Century Electronics was out of business in 1984, but not before releasing 2 poorly received arcade games featuring Quasimodo. Ocean Software also kept the franchise alive. After Century's demise, they acquired the rights to Hunchback and produced 2 sequels. Hunchback 2: The Revenge was a platformer released in 1984, and Hunchback the Adventure is a 1986 text and graphics game. Both games were competent but unremarkable, and neither made a significant splash. Still, none of these sequels tarnish the original's legacy. If anything, Hunchback has retained a nostalgic charm that often feels greater than the game itself. As a popular arcade title and one of the earliest games on the Commodore 64, it found its way into countless home collections, leaving a lasting impression on a generation of gamers. Personally, Hunchback gives me all the feels. I never even saw it in the arcade, but I loved it and played it often. It takes me back to my earliest days with the 64 and reminds me that sometimes the simplest games are also the most memorable. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider leaving a like or subscribing. And if you have any memories of Hunchback, I'd love to hear them. Drop them in the comments. Hope to see you again.